Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation. So today I'm going to be talking about verbs and giving a simple introduction on the categories of verbs, active versus passive voice, and verb tenses along with person. So let's begin with a simple definition. So what is a verb? A verb is a word that expresses an action or a state of being. So therefore, a verb can express a physical action, for example, to swim or to write, or a mental action, which is an action that's invisible to the eye. It's something that we cannot see, but it is still an action. Some examples of mental actions can include to think or to guess. However, verbs can also express a state of being, such as to be or to exist. So now let's look at the three categories of verbs. So the three categories of verbs include action verbs, linking verbs, and helping verbs. Now, a majority of people may forget helping verbs because they cannot stand alone in a sentence because it would not create a complete thought. If the only verb in a sentence is a helping verb, it would not create a complete sentence. However, helping verbs are just as important as action and linking verbs. So now let's look at some examples for each of these types of verbs. So an action verb animates a sentence either physically or mentally. It basically brings a sentence to life. So let's look at this first example. I love books. Love is an action verb because it is a mental action. Even though we cannot see love, it is still an emotion. Let's look at the second example. Kate played basketball. Played is an action verb because it is a physical activity. Kate played basketball. She is doing something, and in this case, she is playing basketball. Some other examples of action verbs include jump, drop, whistle, or dream. So now that we understand action verbs, let's move on to linking verbs. So linking verbs are verbs that don't express action, but they help complete the sentence by describing or identifying the subject. So for example, Maria turned red. Turned is a linking verb because it connects the descriptive word red to the subject Maria. In the other example, the movie sounds interesting. Sounds is a linking verb because it connects the subject movie with the descriptive word interesting. So now let's look at the common linking verbs. So some common linking verbs include appear, grow, smell, be, look, sound, become, remain, taste, feel, or seem. So now let's look at helping verbs. Helping verbs are verbs that either help the action verb or the linking verb. So let's look at the first example. I am writing this paper. Am is a helping verb because it is helping the action verb writing. Helping verbs also allow the sentence to be a complete thought and also indicate whether the sentence is in the present, past, or future tense, which I will get into more later in this presentation. So let's look at the second example. Matthew will play the cello. Will is the helping verb because it is helping the action verb play. So now that we've looked at the three categories of verbs, let's look at active and passive voice and see how it applies to verbs. So verbs indicate whether the subject performs an action called active voice or receives the action called passive voice. So generally, it's important to use active voice as often as possible in your writing because the sentence generally sounds better and is more clear. So I know a lot of people can be confused with active and passive voice, so let's look at some examples. So here is an example of a sentence in active voice. Grace smashed the ball over the net. So this is an example of active voice because the subject, Grace, is performing the action smashed. And as we can see here, smashed is an example of an action verb. So here is the same sentence written in the passive voice. The ball was smashed over the net by Grace. So as we can see here, the subject, Grace, is receiving the action smashed. So as you can see in both of these examples, the active voice sounds better and it's usually more clear. So try to use active voice as much as possible when writing a sentence. So now let's look at verb tenses in regards to person and tense. So person refers to the person or thing that is a subject or object. So there is first, second, and third person. First person is usually a first person perspective. It usually is in regard to words such as I, she spoke to me. So therefore, it's a first person perspective. It's basically the writer telling you his or her story. Second person usually is the audience being told how to do something, or it's usually when a sentence is speaking to the audience, and some examples of words that would indicate it's in the second voice is basically you. So for example, she spoke to you. So third person is, I like to use a phrase like a camera recording an event. Usually you're not sure who is the narrator, but it still is talking about a subject. So for example, he, she, or a thing, it. In regards to tense, tense is when the action or state of being of the verb is taking place. It usually refers to time. So let's look at some common verb tenses. So there are more verb tenses than what I have listed, but these are the most common. So present tense is an action that's going on now. Past tense is an action that has already occurred, and future is an action that has not yet taken place. So let's look at some examples of sentences in these tenses. So the first sentence, she calls him on the phone. This is an example of present tense because it is happening right now. And as you can see, calls is an action verb. She called him on the phone. This is an example of past tense because this has already occurred. And as we can see, called is the action verb. She will call him on the phone. This is an example of future tense because, as we can see, there's a helping verb, will, and the action verb call, and will is indicating that this has not happened yet, which indicates that this is a future tense sentence. So now I have an activity for you in order to really test your knowledge and see if you understand verbs. So this is the first activity. What I want you to do is look at the photo and create a sentence that includes the following: at least one verb in the present tense, a sentence that is in the active voice, and a sentence that is in the third person. So I will give you about 7 seconds to complete this activity, and if you need more time, then you may pause this video. Alright, so let's look at 2 sentences that I have written, even though you only needed 1. I just really want to show you how many different sentences you can create from this photo. So the first example is Michael swings the bat. So there's at least one verb, swings, and it's an action verb. The sentence is also in the present tense. Swings indicates that. The sentence is in the active voice because the subject is performing the action. Michael is swinging the bat, and this is in the third person. Let's look at the second example. He swings the bat to hit the ball. There are actually 2 verbs in here. 2 action verbs, swings and hit. This is also in the present tense. It's also in the active voice because he is performing the action. He is swinging the bat to hit the ball. And this is again in third person. So here's one other activity I want you to do. So here I've already written a sentence for you, and I want you to identify the following: whether there is one verb or multiple verbs, and whether the verb or verbs are action, linking, or helping verbs, whether the sentence is in active or passive voice, and whether this is in first, second, or third person. And again, I will give you about 7 seconds to complete this activity, and if you need more time, you may just pause this video. All right, so let's look at the sentence. So as we can see here, I is first person because it is you telling the story. It is a first person perspective. The sentence is also in the active voice because I is performing the activity, which is running. And as we can see here, there are two verbs. Am is a helping verb because it is helping the action verb, running. So therefore, I am running for charity, first person, active voice. Am is a helping verb, and running is an action verb. So here are just my citations for the images I used in this presentation. And this is the end of my presentation. I really hope that you learned more about verbs and you can use this knowledge and apply it to your writing. Thank you.